The massive chamber stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls gleaming with light from distant stars. 47 different alien species sat in their designated sections, each area carefully designed for their unique needs. The insect-like Klaxi hung from specially made webs near the ceiling. The rock-skinned granite dwellers sat on heated stone benches. The floating jellyfish creatures from the gas giant worlds hovered in their protective bubbles filled with methane. At the center of it all stood Admiral Vexterra, her blue skin shimmering under the chamber lights. She had 4 arms, each one moving gracefully as she spoke. Her species, the hegemony, had been fighting wars among the stars for over 2,000 years. They knew battle better than almost anyone. "My friends," she began, her voice carrying easily through the translation devices that every species wore. "We have a problem. A big problem." The holographic display above her head came to life, showing numbers and charts that made several species gasp in shock. Red bars showed human casualties from the last year of fighting against the rebel colonies in the Outer Rim. The numbers were not good. "Look at these facts," Vexterra said, pointing with 2 of her arms. "In the Battle of Kepler Station we lost 300 human soldiers. Only 12 Korvaxi died in the same fight. At the Siege of New Mars, 200 humans were killed or wounded. The Crystal People from Vorthak Prime? They lost just 5 warriors." A low rumble came from the Korvaxi section. These beings looked like they were made of living metal, their silver skin reflecting the chamber lights. Their leader, General Thane, stood up slowly. His voice sounded like steel grinding against stone when he spoke. "The humans are brave," he said. "No one questions their courage. But they are soft. Their bones break too easily. Their skin tears like paper. They cannot see in the dark like we can. They cannot hear sounds that are too high or too low. They need to breathe air constantly, and that air must be exactly the right mixture. They are like children trying to fight in a war meant for adults." Many heads nodded around the chamber. The truth was hard to argue with. Humans had only been part of the Galactic Defense Force for 50 years, ever since Earth had joined the Alliance. In that time they had earned respect for their determination and creativity. But they had also died in numbers that shocked their alien allies. Commander Emily Roberts sat alone in the human section, a small area near the back of the chamber. She was 42 years old and had been fighting among the stars for half her life. Scars covered her hands from battles on a dozen different worlds. She wore the blue uniform of the Galactic Defense Force, but her chest held more medals than most aliens earned in their entire careers. She listened quietly as species after species stood up to speak about human weakness. The 8-legged spider creatures from Arachnos talked about how humans were too slow. The bird-like Skyborn explained how human eyes could barely see compared to their own. Even the peaceful tree people from Woodland Prime spoke sadly about how many human friends they had lost in recent battles. "It breaks our hearts," said Elder Oakmind, his bark-like skin creaking as he moved. "We have grown fond of the humans. They are kind to us and they fight beside us without fear. But we cannot watch them die anymore. It is too painful." Admiral Vexterra nodded sadly. "This brings us to our proposal today. We must remove humans from all combat positions in the Galactic Defense Force. They should work in safer jobs where their talents can be used without putting their lives at risk. Medical work, engineering, communications, supply management. These are jobs where humans can help us win wars without having to fight in them." The chamber erupted in discussion. Different species talked to each other in their various languages, creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, roars, and musical tones. The translation devices worked overtime to keep up with all the conversation. Finally, the ethereal representative spoke. These beings were made of pure energy and rarely took sides in political debates. When they did speak, everyone listened carefully. "We have studied the combat data for many cycles," the ethereal said, its voice sounding like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The mathematical conclusion is clear. Humans are 847% more likely to die in combat than the average galactic species. They are 234% more likely to be seriously wounded. Logic supports this proposal completely." Commander Roberts felt all eyes turned toward her. As the only human representative on the council, it was her job to speak for her entire species. She had known this day would come eventually. The numbers did not lie, and her people were dying in terrible numbers every time they went to war. She stood up slowly, her human legs feeling weak compared to the powerful limbs of the species around her. At 5 feet and 6 inches tall, she was smaller than almost every other being in the chamber. Her brown hair was streaked with gray from stress and age. Her green eyes held the sadness of someone who had lost too many friends in battle. The chamber fell completely silent as she walked to the speaking area. Every alien watched her carefully, wondering what the human would say. Many of them genuinely cared about humanity and wanted to protect them. Others simply saw humans as a military liability that needed to be removed from dangerous situations. Roberts reached the center of the chamber and looked around at all the different faces staring back at her. She took a deep breath of the carefully controlled air and prepared to speak for her entire species. The next morning brought a steady stream of speakers to the council chamber. One by one, different alien species presented their evidence about why humans should not fight in wars anymore. Each presentation was more detailed than the last, and each one made the same point clear: humans were simply not built for combat. General Marcus Stone from the human military sat in the observation area, watching his species being discussed like a science experiment. His jaw was tight as he listened to aliens who had fought beside his soldiers now explaining why those same soldiers were not good enough for battle anymore. The reptilian saurians went first. Their leader, War Chief Srak, moved to the center with lightning speed. His green scales gleamed as he demonstrated the natural reflexes that made his people deadly fighters. In less than 2 seconds he drew his weapon, fired at 6 different targets and returned the gun to its holster. The targets had been hit perfectly. Human reflexes are too slow, Srak said, his forked tongue flickering as he spoke. In the time it takes a human to see danger and react, a saurian warrior can kill 3 enemies. We have tested this many times. The average human reaction time is 0.25 seconds. Ours is 0.08 seconds. In battle, this difference means life or death. The Korvaxi delegation stood next. Their metal skin made ringing sounds as they moved. General Thane pulled out a plasma rifle and fired it directly at his own chest. The energy blast bounced off harmlessly, leaving only a small scorch mark on his silver skin. Humans wear armor because they need it, he said simply. We are our own armor. Energy weapons cannot hurt us. Bullets bounce off us like raindrops. Humans die from wounds that would not even slow us down. The demonstrations continued for hours. The crystal beings from Vortex showed how their bodies could absorb energy attacks and use that power to fight back stronger. The insect warriors from the Klaxi hive worlds revealed how their natural armor could stop even armor-piercing rounds. The floating gas dwellers proved they could survive in the vacuum of space without any protection at all. Each demonstration was more impressive than the last. Each one made humans look weaker and more fragile by comparison. Commander Roberts watched quietly, taking notes on a small tablet. She did not look upset or angry. She just listened and learned. By midday the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Zilneth, the chief medical officer for the Galactic Defense Force, presented casualty reports that painted a grim picture. His tentacled head swayed back and forth as he spoke, a sign of distress among his people. In the last 6 months alone, he said sadly, I have treated 2,847 wounded humans. In that same time period, I have treated only 394 wounded soldiers from all other species combined. The humans make up only 8% of our fighting force, but they account for 67% of our medical cases. He brought up images of human soldiers in hospital beds, their bodies broken by weapons and battles. Many in the chamber looked away. These aliens genuinely cared about their human allies and did not like seeing them suffer. Broken bones, internal bleeding, torn muscles, damaged organs, Dr. Zilneth continued. These injuries are rare among other species but common among humans. Their bodies simply cannot handle the stress of modern warfare. The afternoon brought more technical presentations. Engineers showed how human equipment had to be specially designed because humans were weaker than other species. Weapons had to have less recoil because human shoulders could not handle the impact. Armor had to be lighter because humans could not carry heavy loads for long distances. Even their spacecraft had to have special life support systems because humans needed such specific environmental conditions to survive. As the sun outside the chamber began to set, casting long shadows across the crystal walls, the final presentations began. These focused on successful military operations where non-human forces had performed better than expected after human units were removed from dangerous roles. Admiral Korth from the Deep Space Fleet showed tactical recordings from the Battle of Titan VII. When we moved human forces to support roles and replaced them with Korvaxi shock troops, our casualty rate dropped by 73%. The mission was completed in half the expected time with minimal losses. Similar stories came from ground commanders, fleet admirals and special forces leaders. Again and again the message was the same. Removing humans from direct combat made operations safer and more successful for everyone involved. As the presentations ended, a heavy silence fell over the chamber. The evidence was clear, scientific, and undeniable. Humans were brave and determined, but they were also fragile in ways that made them unsuitable for the violent reality of galactic warfare. Commander Roberts finally stood up. The chamber turned to look at her, waiting to hear how humanity would respond to everything that had been said. She walked slowly to the speaking area, her footsteps echoing in the quiet chamber. She looked around at all the alien faces watching her. Some looked sympathetic, feeling sorry for humanity's physical limitations. Others looked impatient, wanting to move forward with the obvious solution. A few looked genuinely curious about what she might say to defend her species against such overwhelming evidence. Roberts cleared her throat and began to speak, her voice calm and steady despite the enormous pressure she faced. "Honored representatives," she said, "I have listened carefully to everything you have shared today. Every fact, every number, every demonstration. I will not argue with your evidence because it is all true." A murmur of surprise went through the chamber. Many had expected her to defend humanity or argue against the facts that had been presented. "We are slower than Saurians," she continued. "We are softer than Korvaxi. We cannot survive in space like the gas dwellers or absorb energy like the crystal people. We break easily, we bleed easily, and yes, we die much more easily than any of you." The chamber waited to hear what point she was trying to make. Commander Roberts stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by 47 different alien species, all waiting to hear what she would say next. The silence was so complete that the soft humming of the life support system seemed loud in comparison. "You are absolutely right about our weaknesses," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation devices. "But I ask you to consider one thing that your data cannot measure. When a human soldier sees his friend fall in battle, when a human medic works on a wounded alien under enemy fire, when a human pilot flies into impossible odds to save civilians, what drives them forward is not superior strength or natural armor." She paused, looking directly at Admiral Vexterra. "It is something your computers cannot calculate and your medical scanners cannot detect. We call it the human spirit. We do not fight because we are the strongest. We fight because we choose to, even when we know we might not survive." Admiral Vexterra's 4 arms moved in a gesture of respectful acknowledgement, but her expression remained firm. "Commander Roberts, we understand and admire human courage. But courage cannot stop a plasma bolt. Determination cannot heal a severed artery. Spirit cannot replace lost limbs." The voting began immediately after Roberts returned to her seat. The process was formal and recorded, with each species announcing their decision clearly for the official record. The results were exactly what everyone expected. "The Saurian Republic votes in favor of the proposal," announced War Chief Srak. "The Korvaxi Empire votes in favor," said General Thane, his metallic voice ringing across the chamber. "The Crystal Collective of Vorthak Prime votes in favor," chimed the representative from that species, her voice like musical bells. One by one each alien species cast their vote. The insect warriors voted yes. The floating gas dwellers voted yes. The tree people from Woodland Prime voted yes with obvious sadness in their voices. Even the peaceful species that rarely participated in warfare voted to remove humans from combat roles. The ethereal representative floated forward when their turn came. "We vote based on pure logic and mathematical probability. The evidence is overwhelming. We vote in favor of the proposal." When all 46 non-human species had voted, the result was unanimous. Not a single alien species had voted against removing humans from combat positions. Commander Roberts was not allowed to vote since the proposal directly concerned her own species. Admiral Vexterra stood to make the announcement official. "By unanimous vote of all member species, Resolution 847 is hereby passed into law. All human personnel currently serving in combat roles within the Galactic Defense Force will be reassigned to support positions within 30 standard days." The chamber erupted in mixed reactions. Some species made sounds of relief, happy that their human friends would be safer. Others remained quietly respectful, understanding that this was a difficult moment for humanity. The Klaxi insects clicked their approval loudly, while the tree people swayed sadly in their section. Roberts stood up one final time. The chamber quickly quieted to hear her response to the historic vote. "The human delegation accepts the will of this council," she said with dignity. "We will comply fully with Resolution 847. Our soldiers, pilots, and Special Forces personnel will report to their new assignments as directed." Her voice remained steady, but something in her tone made several alien representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. There was no anger in her words, no bitterness or resentment. Instead, there was a quiet certainty that seemed almost prophetic. We have served alongside many of you in battle, she continued. We have bled together, fought together, and mourned our dead together. That brotherhood will not change even if our roles do. She gathered her papers and prepared to leave. Humanity will serve where you believe we can be most useful. We will maintain your equipment, supply your forces, treat your wounded, and coordinate your communications. We will do these jobs with the same dedication we brought to combat. As she walked toward the exit, Roberts paused and looked back at the assembled representatives. I hope you are right about this decision. I truly do. But if the day comes when you need warriors who fight not because they are the strongest or the fastest, but because they refuse to give up when giving up makes sense, you know where to find us. The massive doors closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the alien representatives to contemplate her final words. Within hours of the vote, orders went out across the galaxy. Human combat units received immediate reassignment notices. Major David Miller, who had led successful ground campaigns on 12 different worlds, found himself transferred to logistics coordination. Captain Sarah Johnson, whose fighter squadron had the highest success rate in the fleet, was moved to pilot training programs. Colonel James Anderson, whose Special Forces team had completed missions other species considered impossible, was assigned to equipment testing and evaluation. The most experienced human military leaders were scattered across non-combat roles. Some became instructors at training academies, sharing their tactical knowledge with alien students. Others were assigned to research and development, where their creative problem-solving skills could be used safely. Many were moved to medical corps positions, where their natural empathy made them excellent caregivers. The transition happened quickly and efficiently. Within 3 weeks, human Marines had been replaced by Corvaxi shock troops on frontline bases. Human pilots had turned over their fighters to silicon-based Nexans whose reaction times were 3 times faster. Human Special Forces compounds stood empty as their former occupants reported to supply depots and communication centers. The galaxy's military leaders were satisfied with the change. Statistical models predicted a significant reduction in casualty rates and an increase in operational efficiency. The war machine of the Galactic Defense Force would run more smoothly without the constant need to account for human physical limitations. Nobody noticed that the humans accepted their new roles with unusual grace, as if they somehow knew something their alien allies did not. 6 months passed quietly after the vote. The Galactic Defense Force operated more efficiently than ever before. Casualty reports showed dramatic improvements, just as the mathematical models had predicted. Corvaxi shock troops completed missions with minimal losses. Nexan pilots achieved victory ratios that human pilots had never matched. The Crystal Warriors from Vorthak absorbed enemy fire and kept fighting when any human would have fallen. Admiral Vexterra reviewed these reports with satisfaction from her command ship in the core worlds. The decision to remove humans from combat had been correct. The data proved it beyond any doubt. Then the scanners detected something impossible. Long-range sensors picked up massive energy signatures approaching from the empty space between galaxies. Ships unlike anything in the galactic database were moving toward civilized space at incredible speeds. Their design was alien even by galactic standards, built with technology that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The first contact came without warning. A fleet of dark vessels emerged from hyperspace near the outer colony of New Haven. They did not respond to communication attempts. They did not send diplomatic messages. They simply began attacking everything in sight. The local defense force responded immediately. A squadron of Corvaxi cruisers engaged the unknown ships in what should have been a routine first contact battle. Military leaders expected to quickly overwhelm whatever primitive species had wandered into galactic space. The Corvaxi ships lasted less than 10 minutes. Admiral Thex watched in horror from the command center as energy weapons that should have bounced harmlessly off Corvaxi armor instead cut through their metal skin like paper. The enemy vessels seemed to adapt to each attack, their defenses growing stronger with every shot they absorbed. How is this possible? Thex demanded, his metallic voice filled with disbelief. Our armor has never failed before. Nothing can penetrate Corvaxi battle skin. The answer came too late to save his ships. The enemy weapons were learning. Every time a Corvaxi vessel fired its plasma cannons, the alien ships studied the energy pattern and developed defenses against it. By the 4th volley, the enemy shields were completely immune to Corvaxi firepower. Similar disasters unfolded across a dozen systems as the invasion force spread out like a plague. The aliens called themselves the Keth Mori, and their technology was beyond anything the galaxy had ever encountered. They possessed a collective intelligence that learned from every battle, adapted to every tactic, and evolved countermeasures for every weapon. The Crystal Warriors from Vorthak discovered that their ability to absorb energy actually made the enemy stronger. The Kethmori ships somehow reversed the process, draining power from the crystal beings until they cracked and shattered like glass. The insect swarms from Klaxi found their hive mind coordination jammed by alien psychic interference. Instead of moving as one deadly unit, they became confused individuals that the Kethmori picked off easily. The Saurian speed advantage meant nothing when enemy weapons could track and hit targets moving faster than the eye could follow. Their lightning reflexes could not dodge attacks that came from all directions simultaneously. Within 2 weeks, 12 systems had fallen. Refugee ships fled deeper into galactic space, carrying tales of an enemy that could not be fought using conventional methods. Every species that engaged the Kethmori suffered the same fate: initial success followed by devastating defeat as the aliens adapted to their tactics. Emergency sessions convened across the galaxy. Military leaders who had been confident just months before now faced an enemy they could not understand or defeat. The mathematical models that had guided their decisions for centuries were useless against foes who rewrote the rules of warfare with each battle. That was when the first strange reports began filtering in from occupied worlds. Communications equipment hidden by fleeing civilians occasionally picked up transmissions from behind enemy lines. Most of these messages were pleas for help or final goodbyes from trapped soldiers. But some of the transmissions were different. They spoke of resistance groups still fighting in occupied territories. Small bands of survivors who had somehow avoided capture and were striking back at Kethmori forces. The first detailed report came from a Saurian intelligence officer named Scout Leader Vash. She had been trapped on the mining world of Kepler-7 when the Kethmori invaded. Her emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 3 days before a rescue ship could reach her. "The humans," she gasped as medics treated her wounds. "The humans are still fighting. They should be dead, but they keep fighting." Admiral Vexterra received Vash's full debriefing with growing amazement. The scout described human medics who had converted hospital supplies into explosive devices. Human engineers who had built weapons from mining equipment and spare parts. Human supply officers who had organized multi-species resistance cells using nothing but determination and creative thinking. "They do not fight like warriors," Vash explained, her reptilian features showing confusion. "They fight like people who refuse to accept that they have lost. The Kethmori adaptation systems keep trying to counter their tactics, but humans do not use tactics. They just do whatever needs to be done." More reports arrived daily, each one more incredible than the last. A human doctor named Margaret Thompson had held a field hospital for 3 straight days against overwhelming odds. She had no military training and carried no weapons, but she simply refused to abandon her alien patients. When Kethmori forces finally overran the position, they found that she had treated and evacuated over 200 wounded soldiers of various species. A human supply sergeant named James Miller had somehow coordinated resistance activities across an entire planet. Using nothing but maintenance tunnels and spare communication equipment, he had turned isolated survivor groups into an effective guerrilla network. The Kethmori collective intelligence could not predict his actions because Miller himself did not plan them in advance. He simply responded to whatever crisis needed attention next. The most disturbing report came from a Korvaxi officer who had escaped from a prison camp. The humans in the camp, he said, had begun teaching other species how to think incorrectly, in order to confuse Kethmori adaptation systems. The galaxy's military leaders realized they were facing something unprecedented. An enemy they could not defeat, and allies they had dismissed who somehow could. The breakthrough came from Captain Rextar, a Korvaxi officer who had escaped from a Kethmori prison facility on the industrial world of Gamma 9. He had been captured 3 weeks earlier during the initial invasion and held in a detention center with prisoners from 12 different species. Rextar arrived at the nearest military base in a stolen enemy transport, carrying intelligence that would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. His metallic skin bore scorch marks from his escape, but his message was clear and urgent. "Request immediate conference with High Command," he told the base commander. "The humans, they have found a way to fight the Kethmori. But it makes no sense according to any military doctrine we know." Within hours, Rextar found himself in a secure communication chamber speaking directly to Admiral Vexterra and the Emergency Command Council. His report began simply enough, describing the prison conditions and the Kethmori's systematic interrogation of captured soldiers. "They study us," he explained. "Every species, every fighting style, every tactical preference. They connect to our minds and download our military knowledge. Within days of capturing Saurian warriors, they could predict Saurian attack patterns perfectly. After interrogating Klaxi soldiers, they understood hive mind coordination better than the insects themselves. This matched what military leaders already suspected about Kethmori adaptation abilities. But Rexstar's next words sent shockwaves through the command structure. The humans in the prison were different. When the Kethmori tried to download human military knowledge, something went wrong. Instead of learning how humans fight, the collective intelligence became confused. Admiral Vextera leaned forward, her forearms tense with attention. "Explain what you mean by confused." Rexstar's voice carried amazement even through the translation device. A human medic named Dr. Elizabeth Walker was in the cell next to mine. She had no military training at all. When the Kethmori scanned her mind for combat tactics, they found medical procedures, childhood memories, recipes for Earth food, and something they called stubborn determination to help people no matter what. He paused, struggling to find words for what he had witnessed. The aliens could not process this information. Their collective mind is designed to analyze logical military strategies. But Dr. Walker's mind contained no strategies at all, just an absolute refusal to give up on her patients. The scanning process actually damaged part of the Kethmori network. The implications began to dawn on the assembled military leaders. The Kethmori's greatest strength was their ability to adapt to enemy tactics by understanding how their opponents thought. But human thinking, especially under pressure, did not follow the logical patterns that other species used. Rexstar continued his report, describing how humans in the prison camp had begun organizing resistance activities. A former supply officer named Robert Davis had somehow convinced prisoners from 6 different species to work together on an escape plan. Davis had no authority over any of us, Rexstar said. He was not the highest-ranking officer. He had no special weapons or equipment. But when he said we needed to try escaping even though the odds were impossible, everyone listened to him. Even I listened to him, and I outrank him by 3 grades. The Korvaxi officer described how Davis had used completely unconventional methods to plan their escape. Instead of following standard military procedures, he had asked each species to suggest the most ridiculous and impossible ideas they could think of. Then he had somehow combined these crazy suggestions into a plan that actually worked. The Kethmori collective intelligence monitored our planning sessions, Rexstar explained. But they could not predict what we would do because we did not know what we would do until we actually did it. Davis kept changing the plan based on whatever opportunities appeared. More detailed reports arrived hourly from other escaped prisoners and resistance fighters across occupied territories. Each story painted the same picture. Humans were fighting the Kethmori effectively because they did not fight like soldiers. They fought like people who simply refused to accept defeat regardless of the odds. A human engineer named Thomas Brown had built functional weapons from medical equipment and kitchen utensils. His creations should not have worked according to any known principles of weapon design, but they were devastating Kethmori forces because the alien collective mind could not understand or counter technology that defied logic. A human teacher named Linda Martinez had organized civilian evacuation routes using playground games and children's songs as coordination signals. The Kethmori monitoring systems could not decrypt her communications because there was nothing to decrypt. She was literally using nursery rhymes to coordinate complex military movements. The most incredible report came from the siege of Research Station Beta 7. A human janitor named William Taylor had held the facility for 5 days against a full Kethmori assault force. He had no military training, no combat experience, and no weapons except cleaning supplies. But he had an absolute determination to protect the alien scientists working in the station. Taylor had booby-trapped the facility using floor wax, industrial cleaners, and maintenance tools. His defensive strategy consisted entirely of asking himself, what would make this harder for the bad guys? And then doing whatever occurred to him. The Kethmori adaptation systems could not counter his methods because Taylor himself did not understand how his improvised weapons worked. Admiral Vextera stood slowly as the reports concluded. Around the chamber, representatives from 47 species sat in stunned silence. The mathematical certainty that had guided their decision 6 months ago was crumbling before their eyes. We measured their bodies and found them weak, she said quietly. We measured their technology and found it primitive. We measured their tactics and found them inefficient. But we never measured their willingness to attempt impossible things simply because those things needed to be done. The emergency vote was unanimous and immediate. Resolution 847 was hereby rescinded. All human military personnel would return to active combat duty within 72 hours. The galaxy needed warriors who fought not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they refused to quit when quitting made perfect sense. The Kethmori invasion would end not with superior firepower, but with humanity's most dangerous weapon, the absolute refusal to accept that some battles cannot be won.